Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the soft, golden dawn of the Ottoman Empire, right into the serene courtyards of Topkapı Palace, where the world's most powerful man begins his day in a way that might surprise you. No trumpets, no chaos, no frantic servants tripping over themselves, just gentle footsteps, warm light, and routines designed not for dominance, but for calm. You step into the palace grounds as the first strokes of sunrise brush over the domes and slender cypress trees. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of early jasmine and damp stone. Birds flutter awake in the gardens. Even the Bosphorus beyond seems to stretch lazily, as though savouring the slow awakening. You tread softly across the courtyard stones, softly because there's something about Topkapı at dawn that makes you feel that if you stomp too loudly, history might shush you. The palace guards standing by the gate barely move. They blink, they breathe, but otherwise they look carved from the same pale marble as the archways behind them. And you? You're drifting through this world as if wrapped in a warm shawl of stillness. A cheeky reality check floats into your mind. You probably wouldn't survive a single day as an Ottoman Sultan. But the morning, this you could handle. Because this first hour is surprisingly gentle, more like a spa retreat than the opening act of empire domination. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing our sleepy little global map fill in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass under an archway into the first court, where gardeners move like shadows. Their rakes whisper across gravel paths as they smooth the walkways before the rest of the palace wakes. A fountain burbles softly in the corner, its water flowing with such calm regularity that you feel your shoulders drop a little. This early in the morning, the palace feels more like a monastery than the heart of an empire. And that's intentional. The Ottomans believed that order began in silence, and silence began with sunrise. The soundscape is so gentle, you can count each thing individually. The slow drip of water echoing through the ablution fountain. The distant hum of a boat gliding down the Bosphorus. The rustle of a gardener trimming spent blossoms from a rose bush. And far, far off, the first call of a muezzin greeting the day. A mainstream historical fact enters softly here. Topkapı Palace wasn't one massive building, but a collection of serene courtyards, pavilions, and enclosed gardens. Each area had its own rhythm shaped by function, climate, and the hierarchy of who was allowed to enter. Movement between these spaces was slow and deliberate. No bustling palace traffic jam, no crowded hallways. As you approach a columned walkway, you notice two palace pages lighting the last few lamps along the hall. These aren't for brightness, they're for atmosphere. The sun is rising, but the palace prefers to greet it gradually, like someone slowly opening their eyes after a long sleep. One of the pages, barely more than a teenager, yawns discreetly before catching himself. He quickly straightens, adjusts his indigo robe, and returns to his task. And here comes a quirky historical tidbit. The Ottoman pages were trained so meticulously that they were taught how to yawn silently. Historians still argue whether this was discipline, etiquette, or simply an effort to avoid offending a sleepy sultan. The sun finally touches the tips of the tiled roofs, lighting up the blue and turquoise glazes in a soft morning gleam. The palace cats, royalty in their own right, stretch luxuriously on warm stones. One of them spots you and trots over with the confidence of someone who knows they outrank half the staff. You kneel down to scratch under its chin. The cat responds with a purr so deep it vibrates through your hand. A guard walking by gives a small nod. He likes you. He doesn't like many. You file that away as the single highest honor you are likely to receive today. Crossing into the second court, the atmosphere deepens. This space houses the kitchens, storerooms, council chambers, and despite all that importance, it's still astonishingly quiet at dawn. The cooks move like soft ghosts, preparing breakfast in enormous cauldrons without clanging a single pot. Steam curls up into the rafters, carrying scents of honey, toasted grain, and warm milk. You pause to breathe it in. If comfort had a smell, this would be it. A chef notices your interest and nods proudly. "Breakfast must be peaceful," he whispers. "If it is noisy, the whole day becomes noisy." You glance into the kitchen and notice attendants preparing silver trays with fresh fruits, dates, cheeses, and bread. Simple foods, arranged beautifully. Historians still argue whether the Sultan actually ate much in the morning or simply enjoyed the ritual of watching others prepare the meal. But the care involved is unmistakable. This is not a rushed empire. You make your way past a row of plane trees, their leaves catching the golden light as though painted by hand. Dew glistens on the branches. The whole garden looks like a miniature world suspended in a perfect moment, untouched by politics, armies, or royal demands. A soft breeze moves through the courtyard. Light birdsong, murmurs of distant servants. Everything layered delicately, carefully, like the pattern on an Ottoman miniature painting. You feel yourself sinking into the pace of this place, your heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of early Topkapı. And somewhere deep within, in the hidden chambers at the palace's heart, the Sultan is about to wake, and you're going to follow every serene step of his morning. The palace shifts almost imperceptibly as you move deeper inside. A subtle stirring, like the soft inhalation of a great creature waking, rolls through the stone corridors. The air cools as you pass under a series of archways leading toward the inner apartments, where only the most trusted attendants are allowed. The world becomes quieter with every step, not the emptiness of neglect, but the silence of deep respect. You slow your pace, because everyone else slows theirs here, even the cats, usually bold enough to nap on ceremonial cushions, pad softly as they slip across the polished floors. The tiles beneath your feet gleam with soft reflections of dawn, each step echoing faintly like a heartbeat held in the palm of a hand. You approach a long, narrow hallway leading toward the Sultan's chambers. The walls are lined with intricate Iznik tiles, blue and white patterns swirling like calm water. Lamps flicker between the designs, throwing tiny waves of gold across the walls, as if the palace itself is quietly shimmering awake. A group of attendants stands outside the entrance. Men known as the Mutaferica, the elite personal aides. They wear perfectly pressed robes in jewel tones, teal, saffron, deep ruby, not a wrinkle among them, not a loose fold. Their turbans are wrapped with meticulous precision. But their faces carry the gentle softness of men who've been awake since well before sunrise. One attendant gives a tiny signal to another, a subtle tilt of the head. Without a word spoken, the morning routine begins. Two young servants slip silently into the Sultan's outer chamber. Their job is to wake the room before waking the man. They light the first candles of the day, using long, graceful tapers to avoid any noise. Flames tremble up from the wicks, faint at first, then steadying into a soft, golden glow. The curtains thick velvet embroidered with curling vines, are drawn back just enough to let the earliest and most respectful light enter. Not a burst of brightness, just a respectful gesture. And here comes a mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman Sultan's mornings were deliberately gentle. The empire may have stretched 3 continents, but the rhythm of the Sultan's day began with calm. He was not jolted awake by servants or alarms. Instead, his room was gradually brightened and warmed, allowing his mind to enter the day peacefully. You peer through the open doorway, watching as the attendants place fresh water in delicate ewers of silver and jade. One spreads a soft rug near the foot of the bed. Another arranges the Sultan's slippers so that the embroidered toes face outward, a small courtesy that ensures he can step into them without bending or fumbling. A 4th attendant unseals a small jar of rose water, allowing its fragrance to drift through the chamber. The scent is faint, designed not to overwhelm, but to ease the transition from dream to waking. A quirky historical tidbit drifts into the scene. Attendants were trained to breathe through their noses, not their mouths, so they wouldn't accidentally exhale too loudly near the Sultan during his wake-up. Yes, silent breathing was a real skill at court. Historians still argue whether it was a practical necessity or simply one of those palace traditions that stuck around because no one wanted to question it. The room glows warmly now, like honey melting over cool marble. Finally, one of the older attendants steps closer to the bed, bows his head deeply, and speaks the first human sound the Sultan hears each morning. "Time to greet the day, my Sultan." But his voice is barely above a whisper, more like a breeze brushing silk than language. The Sultan stirs beneath the soft layers of cotton and silk. You don't see his face yet, only the slow movement of fabric as he stretches. Not dramatically, but with the quiet luxuriousness of someone who knows the world will wait for him. When he finally sits up, the attendants remain perfectly still, heads lowered. Only when he steps into his slippers do they rise and begin their gentle choreography. 2 servants bring warm water for washing. One offers a silk cloth. Another retrieves a small jade bowl filled with perfumed oil. None speak unless addressed. Their movements are like calligraphy, elegant, unbroken, and flowing from one curve to the next. The Sultan washes his face, the water glistening in the dawn light, cooling the final remnants of sleep. You hear only the soft drip of water returning to the basin, each drop echoing in the calm. He takes a long, slow breath, as though inhaling the scent of the entire palace: rosewater, marble, morning air, and history. Then he stands, and the attendants sweep into motion, preparing the next stage of his peaceful morning. As you follow them deeper into the private rooms, you can't help thinking that almost no one outside these walls ever saw this version of the Sultan. Not the ruler, not the warrior, not the judge of empires. Just a man beginning his day with ritual, stillness, and a pace so gentle it feels like a lullaby written in gold and stone. You follow the attendants through a curved archway patterned with deep blue tiles, each piece shining like a fragment of early sky. As you step inside the next chamber, warm air envelopes you, soft, humid, scented faintly with amber and citrus. The sound of water echoes gently off marble walls. This is the private hammam, the heart of the Sultan's morning serenity. Not a public bath, not a grand hall meant for visitors. This is the quietest sanctuary in Topkapı, a place where steam rises like prayer and the world dissolves into warmth. The attendants move with delicate precision. 2 lift brass ewers from heated basins, the metal glinting in the filtered morning light. Another carries a folded stack of white cotton peshtemals, towels so thin they look like woven air. You step onto the warm marble, the stone beneath your feet smooth and glowing. It's the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones, the kind that tells your muscles it's safe to let go. Inside, the Sultan pauses at the edge of the warm room, as though savoring the transition. Cool dawn air behind him, gentle heat before him. The moment he enters, the steam drapes over him like a silk veil. The room itself is a masterpiece of elegance, domed ceiling pierced with small glass windows shaped like stars, patterned marble floors in soft greys and creams, bronze bowls catching droplets of water, niches filled with soaps wrapped in muslin. As he sits on a low marble bench, attendants pour warm water over his shoulders. It cascades in smooth ribbons, catching sparkles of light from the ceiling. A mainstream historical fact drifts into the warmth. Ottoman hammams were both hygienic and spiritual spaces, designed for purification not just of the body, but of the mind. Even sultans followed regular bathing rituals, believing that a clean body supported a clear, wise temperament, an essential quality of leadership. One of the attendants begins preparing soap, not the dry, cracking blocks you might imagine, but a soft, fragrant lather made from olive oil and herbs. He whips it into airy foam using a fine mesh cloth, creating billowing clouds of bubbles. You catch the fragrance orange blossom, wild thyme, and something musky, grounding, and ancient. Another attendant begins a gentle exfoliation routine using a casemate, a silk woven cloth that glides across the skin with a whisper. Even from a respectful distance, you can feel how soothing the rhythm is. Slow, sweeping, almost hypnotic strokes. Steam swirls around you in soft spirals. Every sound feels rounded, softened, smoothed by heat. The splash of water, the brush of cloth, the quiet drip of marble. And here comes a quirky historical tidbit. Some sultans were known to hum softly during their hammam routines, believing the steam improved the tone of their voice. Historians still argue whether this was a vocal warm-up technique or simply the side effect of being incredibly relaxed in warm water. Through the drifting mist, you catch the faint glimmer of bronze fixtures shaped like tulips, the Ottoman symbol of beauty, delicacy, and ephemeral life. Tulips appear everywhere in Topkapı, but here they seem especially poetic, blooming in a room where everything is softened, smoothed, and washed clean. A bowl of cool rose water sits nearby. When the attendants finish the warm bathing ritual, they will pour this over the Sultan's face, not to shock, but to refresh, to brighten the senses just before he moves on with his morning. He closes his eyes. The steam thickens. The rhythm of water becomes a slow, steady cadence. It's easy to imagine losing track of time in this place. The hammam is a world without clocks, a space measured by heat, breath, and the slow unfurling of limbs. As the attendants gently wrap him in a fresh peshtamal, the steam clings to his skin like mist on polished stone. You notice something. Each attendant moves without speaking, communicating through tiny gestures honed over years of service. The flick of a wrist, the tilt of a chin, the gentlest of nods. It's choreography, not labor, a dance of care, a ritual of quiet power. When the Sultan finally rises, the attendants sweep the warm air aside with graceful motions of the towels, clearing a path toward the cool antechamber. You follow him as he steps into this lighter room, where bowls of herbs and amber perfumes sit waiting. Light pours in softly through narrow windows, illuminating the small curls of steam lifting from his shoulders. He pauses, breathing deeply. You can see him shift from dreamy softness into gentle alertness, the way a mind settles before it begins thinking again. This hammam, this warmth, this ritual of water and silence. This is where his day truly begins. Not with power, not with meetings, not with commands, with serenity, with breath, with the humbling reminder that even a sultan starts the day by washing away yesterday. And as he steps back into the palace proper, ready for robes, fabrics, and the quiet elegance of imperial preparation, you follow. Steam fading behind you like a dream the morning chooses not to keep. You walk alongside the sultan as he leaves the warm glow of the hammam behind, stepping into a corridor where the air is cool again, crisp with the faint scent of polished wood and lavender. The shift in temperature wakes you gently, like stepping out of a dream. Here the palace begins its transformation from a sanctuary of steam into a stage of fabric, folds, and quiet ceremony. This is the robbing chamber, a place where elegance is not a luxury but a language. The moment the sultan enters, the attendants bow in perfect unison. Their movements are smooth, synchronized, and deeply practiced, as if the room itself has rehearsed for years. Soft carpets line the floors, woven with deep crimson, sapphire, and gold threads that catch the morning light in tiny, shimmering sparks. On a long wooden table lies an array of carefully arranged garments. Silk robes in shades of ivory, jade, and midnight blue. Velvet caftans embroidered with gold thread arabesques. Belts adorned with delicate filigree. Turbans wrapped and ready with quiet perfection. The sultan steps forward, and the attendants begin the morning's peaceful choreography. One unrolls a robe, an ivory silk garment stitched with tiny tulip motifs. The fabric ripples like water, catching the soft tilt of sunlight coming through the lattice windows. Another attendant lifts a deep teal kaftan lined with sable, its embroidery shimmering in patterns that seem to shift as you blink. A mainstream historical fact settles gently here. Ottoman ceremonial clothing was a direct expression of authority, spirituality, and tradition. Colors, patterns, and fabrics were not chosen by whim. Every thread meant something. Deep blues symbolized calm rule. Greens carried religious prestige. Gold reflected not wealth, but divine guidance. But the sultan does not choose quickly. His mornings are never rushed. The attendants present each garment with quiet reverence, holding the fabric at its edges to avoid creasing or disturbing the intricate patterns. The sultan runs his fingers lightly across the silk, testing its weight, feeling the temperature of the fabric. You notice a robe dyed a soft saffron, its collar trimmed with delicate fur. The shade glows gently in the morning light. One of the elder attendants, sensing your curiosity, whispers, "Saffron keeps the mind awake, not sharp, but present." You nod. This morning routine isn't about grandeur. It's about preparing a mind that must remain steady through the entire weight of empire. The sultan finally selects a deep indigo kaftan with gold thread embroidery curling across the sleeves like vines reaching toward the sun. The moment he lifts his arms, two attendants sweep forward, guiding the garment over his shoulders with such practiced grace that you barely see the motion. He adjusts the sleeves slightly, smoothing the cuffs. The indigo fabric shines with a soft sheen, catching the warmth of his skin from the hammam. Next comes the turban, the morning crown of calm simplicity. An attendant brings forward a long length of white muslin. He wraps it slowly around the sultan's head, each turn perfectly aligned with the last. The folds build with gentle precision, layered like ripples in quiet water. A small polished jewel is set at the front, not massive, not gleaming aggressively, but subtle. A teardrop of jade, soft, grounded. A quirky historical tidbit slips in like a whisper. The turban wrapping process could take over 20 minutes, and palace attendants were specifically graded on their folding consistency. Some even claimed they could assess an attendant's discipline by the shape of his wraps. Historians still debate whether that's truth or palace folklore, but the pride here is unmistakable. The room brightens slightly as the sun climbs higher. The embroidered gold threads on the Sultan's robe glow, catching every beam as if eager to tell the world that day has begun. The attendants bring forward a low mirror framed in carved walnut. The Sultan gazes at his reflection, not vainly but thoughtfully, a man preparing not for appearances but for steadiness, for clarity. You take in the quiet ritual around him, the gentle smoothing of a sleeve, the lifting of a collar, the measured tightening of a belt, the soft exhale of an attendant relieved that the folds lay perfectly. There's something deeply meditative about it. Clothing not as costume, but as intention, not as burden, but as shield. Dressed at last, the Sultan steps onto a small crimson rug placed before the window. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sun rest on his face. The room waits with him, every attendant perfectly still. Even time seems to soften. Then he opens his eyes, serene and centered. The quiet of the hammam still clings to him. The calm weight of silk steadies his posture. This is not the entrance of a ruler. This is the beginning of a man's day. He turns toward the door, ready for the soft next step of the morning, the library of early light and the manuscripts waiting within. And you follow him, footsteps nearly silent on the warm carpets, wrapped in the peace of a morning crafted with such deliberate serenity that even the palace walls seem to inhale slowly. You follow the Sultan down a short, carpeted hallway, where the morning light turns from soft gold into a cool, almost pearly glow. The air shifts again, lighter, quieter, touched with the faintest scent of ink and polished wood. The moment you step across the threshold, you understand exactly why the Sultan comes here every morning. This is the inner library, the sanctuary where the empire breathes through paper, leather, and calligraphy. The room greets you with a hush so complete it feels intentional, as if every manuscript is politely asking you to lower your voice. Shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling, carved from dark walnut and inlaid with delicate mother-of-pearl diamonds. Narrow windows allow slivers of dawn to pass through carved wooden lattice screens, casting geometric shadows across the floor like soft nets of light. The Sultan pauses at the center of the room, his robe settling around him in gentle folds. His posture shifts, not stiff, not grand, but calm, as though this space has a gravity all its own. A scribe steps forward, bowing deeply. His robe is simple compared to the attendants, undyed cotton with faint ink stains around the cuffs. He carries a velvet-lined tray with 3 manuscripts, each wrapped carefully in silk. He places the tray on a low reading table. The Sultan approaches with the unhurried grace of someone savoring the moment. You can see, even before the silk is unwrapped, that this is one of the most peaceful parts of his day. Not ceremonial, not performative, just quietly human. The scribe's voice is soft. Selections for the morning, my Sultan. He unfolds the first silk cloth to reveal a thin manuscript with elegant looping Arabic script along a deep blue cover. The Sultan brushes a thumb lightly across the edge of the binding. This arrived from Damascus, the scribe explains, a commentary on celestial movement. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind like a faint lamp in a dark corner. Ottoman sultans were often highly educated, fluent in philosophy, mathematics, calligraphy, theology, and poetry. Many wrote works of their own under pen names, and the imperial libraries held thousands of manuscripts copied and illuminated by palace scholars. The Sultan opens the first book slowly. His fingertips glide over the page. The ink shimmers slightly under the morning light. Black, gold, and saffron pigments intertwined with delicate illustrations of stars and planetary paths. You lean a little closer, careful not to cross the invisible line of respect. The tiny calligraphic flourishes look almost alive, spreading across the page like growing vines. The Sultan reads silently, but every so often he tilts his head slightly, as though savouring a line of poetry, admiring the logic of an argument, or amused by a bold claim from a long-dead scholar. He sets this manuscript aside and draws the next one toward him. This one is thicker, its cover wrapped in dark leather softened with age. The moment he opens it, the scent of old ink drifts out, warm, dusty, oddly comforting. The scribe explains, "An illustrated work from the workshop of Herat. The miniatures are exceptional." He's right. On the opened page, you see a detailed painting of a royal garden filled with cypress trees, fountains, and rows of flowers painted in tones of turquoise, ruby, and jade. The figures in the miniature seem to float on air, their robes captured mid-movement. The Sultan smiles faintly. You can almost hear the unspoken thought. Beauty, even in miniature, steadies the spirit. He turns the page with astonishing gentleness. And here comes a quirky historical tidbit. Some Ottoman sultans reportedly turned pages using a tiny ivory tool, not because they were afraid of damaging the manuscript, but because oily fingertips could leave microscopic marks visible under lamplight. Historians still argue whether this was genuine preservation or just a palace habit that became tradition. The Sultan continues reading. The scribe stands silently, hands folded behind his back. Even the attendants seem to fade into the background, blending into the patterns of tile and shadow. You feel the hush settle around you, deep, warm, slow. The outside world, with its noise and politics and demands, feels impossibly distant. After some time, the Sultan reaches for the third manuscript, its silk wrap embroidered with tiny gold stars. As he unwraps it, you notice how the morning light shifts slightly, brightening the room. The Bosphorus glints through the narrow windows like a blade of silver. This final manuscript is a collection of poetry. Short verses, simple lines, words meant to be savoured, not studied. The Sultan reads a verse aloud, voice low. "A quiet morning is a crown no jewel can match." The line hovers in the air, shimmering like gold dust. The scribe bows slightly. "A favourite of your grandfather, my Sultan." The Sultan nods, closing the manuscript gently. He rests his palm on the cover for a moment, as though honouring the memory embedded within. The reading session ends not with formality, but with a breath, the kind of deep, satisfied exhale one gives after filling the mind with something nourishing. This is wisdom before duty, stillness before empire, a man embracing quiet before embracing power. And as the Sultan rises from the low table, ready for his slow breakfast in the garden courtyard, you follow. Your own thoughts softened by the golden hush of a library touched by morning. You step out of the library beside the Sultan, leaving the soft glow of manuscripts behind. The corridor you enter is brighter now. Morning has stretched fully across the palace, warming the tiles and filling the air with the quiet rustle of daily preparation. There is a welcoming scent drifting gently through the hall, warm bread, honey, and fresh herbs. Your stomach responds before your mind does. This can only mean one thing. It's time for the Sultan's breakfast. But not the lavish feast you might imagine. No overflowing tables. No extravagant displays meant to impress visiting envoys. This is the Sultan's private meal, and it is deliberately simple, almost peaceful. As you walk through an archway edged with delicate floral tiles, you enter a small courtyard bathed in soft sun. Birds hop along the patterned stone floor, pecking at crumbs left by gardeners. A fountain murmurs in the center, water gliding down its scalloped tiers with a calming, rhythmic hush. The Sultan steps toward a shaded area where a low, wooden table has been set on an embroidered rug. Cushions in muted tones, saffron, sage, and deep maroon, are arranged neatly around it. A servant kneels to adjust one of them, ensuring it's perfectly fluffed before the Sultan sits. A trio of attendants approaches carrying silver trays. They move with the careful focus of people balancing priceless relics, though what they carry is refreshingly humble. Warm flatbreads brushed lightly with butter. Bowls of olives glistening in morning light. Curls of white cheese wrapped in vine leaves. Fresh cucumbers and herbs. And a small clay dish of honey thick enough to glow like amber. A mainstream historical fact arrives as you observe the spread Ottoman sultans often preferred modest morning meals, believing a calm stomach encouraged a calm mind. Heavy foods were avoided in early hours. Instead, ingredients were chosen for lightness, freshness, and the symbolism of purity and clarity. A servant pours warm, lightly spiced milk into a porcelain cup. Another offers a small dish of dates, perfect spheres of sweetness. The Sultan gestures for you to sit nearby. You settle onto a cushion as the morning breeze carries the mingled scents of herbs and warm bread across the courtyard. The first bite the Sultan takes is slow, thoughtful. He tears a piece of bread, dips it lightly into the honey, and savors it with the quiet appreciation of someone who values simplicity over indulgence. A sparrow lands boldly on the edge of the fountain, watching with hungry curiosity. The Sultan chuckles softly. A servant immediately drops a few crumbs near the bird, who hops over gratefully. One of the older attendants leans toward you and whispers, "The birds know when he eats. They arrive before the food does." You smile. A ruler whose breakfast routine has a fan club is a ruler doing something right. As the Sultan eats, the courtyard hums with soft activity. You notice two young gardeners trimming the potted citrus trees along the walkway. Their small shears snip delicately, each cut releasing a faint mist of citrus scent into the air. A quirky historical tidbit drifts your way. In Topkapı, breakfast was sometimes accompanied by recitations from young pages who practiced their poetry or language skills in gentle, morning-appropriate tones. Historians still debate whether the Sultan genuinely enjoyed these melodic wake-up performances or simply tolerated them because the boys tried so earnestly. Right on cue, a young page steps forward, holding a slim scroll. He clears his throat, nervously but softly, and begins reciting a few lines of early Ottoman poetry. His voice wavers at first, then steadies as he leans into the calm rhythm of the words. The poem is about dawn breaking over a quiet garden, which feels fitting, almost too fitting. You suspect the page practiced this one specifically for today. The Sultan listens, nodding occasionally, not judging, not stern, simply present. When the page finishes, he bows deeply. The Sultan rewards him with a gentle smile, small, but enough to make the boy's eyes brighten with pride. You continue eating small bites of cheese and bread, washing them down with cool water. There's something oddly meditative about the whole ritual. The food is simple, the setting serene, the sounds soothing. This is breakfast designed not to fuel a warrior, but to prepare a thinker, a listener, a ruler who must maintain clarity long after the morning fades. The Sultan takes a final sip of spiced milk, then sets the cup down with deliberate grace. His shoulders relax. He breathes in deeply, as though gathering the last bit of stillness before the machinery of empire begins turning for the day. A soft chime rings from somewhere deeper in the palace, a signal, not an alarm. One of the attendants bows. The inner court prepares itself, my sultan. The sultan rises. The attendants gather the trays swiftly yet silently. Breakfast is over. Serenity is not. You rise with him, stepping onto the sun-warmed tiles as the next part of the morning unfolds. The quiet, choreographed hum of the inner court, where the sultan's day continues not with noise, but with soft footsteps and gentle order. You step with the sultan into the shaded walkway leading toward the inner court, and instantly the atmosphere shifts. The air here feels different. Not heavier, not louder, just precise, as if the very sunlight filters itself into neat, orderly beams out of respect for the routines unfolding within these walls. This is the quiet machinery of the Ottoman Empire, running not on shouts or chaos, but on whispers, soft footfalls, and motions so smooth they barely count as sound. A group of inner court pages, dressed in soft teal and ivory robes, glide across the polished stone floor. They carry scrolls, water pitchers, documents, and small lacquered boxes, each item handled with the care of a sacred relic. Their shoes make no sound. Their sleeves barely rustle. Their faces remain calm, serene, almost meditative. When they pass the sultan, they bow with synchronized grace, not deeply, but with a precise angle that has been practiced countless times. As you follow the sultan deeper into the courtyard, you realize just how many layers of quiet work keep the palace functioning. Two young pages sweep the walkway using small hand brooms made of willow fibers. But they don't just sweep, they glide. Each stroke is identical in length and angle, creating perfectly even patterns in the dust. A caretaker tends to a small tiled fountain, removing stray leaves with a long copper spoon. Instead of splashing, he lifts each leaf with gentle, deliberate patience, careful not to disturb the mirrored surface of the water. An older eunuch reviews a list written in elegant calligraphy. He doesn't speak. He merely points to a name, and a page steps forward silently to receive his instructions. And here floats in a mainstream historical fact. The inner court of Topkapı was one of the most disciplined administrative spaces in the world. Every role, from page to elder, was part of an intricate hierarchy. Work happened through gestures, subtle eye movements, and routines honed from childhood. Loud voices, confusion, or rushing were considered unacceptable, even disrespectful. The Sultan pauses near a group of officials preparing the day's early reports. They kneel around a low table, spreading fresh parchment and dipping reed pens into small pots of ink. The nibs scratch softly, tiny, rhythmic strokes forming beautiful Ottoman letters. You watch one scribe steady his wrist before writing the next line. The sunlight falls across his hand, illuminating the faint shimmer of gold dust mixed into his ink. He notices your stare and whispers, barely audible. Gold helps the ink endure, even when memory fails. He returns to writing with a small smile. A few steps away, 2 pages unfold a map onto a carpet. The cloth map unfurls like a miniature landscape. The Bosphorus painted in deep blues, roads drawn in delicate lines, small villages marked with tiny inked tulips. One page smooths the corners, while another weighs the map down with polished stone markers shaped like seashells. A quirky historical tidbit drifts over from the edges of your mind. Some Ottoman pages were trained not only in discipline and etiquette, but in geography, mathematics, and coded communication. Some could fold a map so precisely that officials joked they could hide an entire province in their sleeve. Historians still argue whether this was hyperbole or an early party trick. As you move farther into the courtyard, you notice a dedicated chamber where slippers are arranged on rows of wooden racks, dozens upon dozens of identical pairs. Pages retrieve and replace them with astonishing precision, ensuring that anyone entering the chambers does so in absolute silence. One young page, barely 10 years old, balances a tray of freshly polished slippers. He walks with careful steps, eyes fixed ahead. He doesn't wobble. He doesn't rush. He simply glides forward like a swan skimming a lake. A supervising eunuch watches with the patient intensity of a teacher who understands how fragile concentration can be at that age. When the boy finishes, the eunuch gives him a single nod. The boy beams, then quickly forces his face back into neutrality. You hide a smile. Discipline doesn't cancel pride. It just teaches it to walk softly. The Sultan moves through this world as though floating, not commanding, not inspecting, just existing among the gears of a finely tuned clock. Every servant adjusts their rhythm subtly to his pace. Every page gives way at exactly the right moment. Every scribe lowers his gaze respectfully before returning to work. And yet, none of it feels oppressive. It feels peaceful, a kind of monastic hum, a living orchestra of quiet tasks. You notice how sunlight glimmers on the polished tiles, creating patterns that dance beneath the feet of passing pages. The breeze brings in hints of rosemary from nearby gardens, mingling with the faint scent of ink and clean linen. Here, the empire is not loud. Here, the empire is not heavy. Here, the empire is stillness in motion. The Sultan stops at a small alcove where a bowl of cool water sits. He washes his hands slowly, symbolic, refreshing, grounding. Pages offer a soft towel and step back in synchronized steps. When he turns to leave, the entire courtyard seems to exhale, not with relief, but with rhythm. One cycle completed, another about to begin. And now the Sultan walks toward the gardens, the next chapter of his morning, where fountains whisper and the air smells of dew and orange blossoms. You follow him into this living tapestry of calm. You step through a low arched doorway with the Sultan and emerge into one of the quietest hearts of Topkapı, the palace gardens. The air here feels different, cooler, greener, threaded with bird song and the hush of water. It's as if the palace has exhaled all its worries into the walls and kept this space untouched, preserved for a single purpose: to let the mind wander slowly. The moment your feet touch the garden path, your ears fill with gentle sounds: the soft crunch of gravel under slippers, the steady murmur of fountains pouring into shallow basins, the flutter of wings as doves lift from a cypress tree, and the distant creak of a gardener's wooden wheelbarrow. The path curves gracefully between tall, slender cypress trees, their deep green silhouettes reaching toward the morning sky. Beneath them, beds of tulips, roses, and hyacinths paint the ground in bursts of crimson, violet, and pale pink. Dew clings to every petal, catching the light in tiny prisms. The Sultan walks without hurry, hands loosely folded behind his back. No grand entourage, no trumpets, just a small, respectful distance, kept by a handful of attendants and guards who know better than to break the calm. You fall into step along the path and immediately feel your own pace slow to match his. A gardener in a simple russet robe kneels beside a patch of tulips, carefully trimming wilted blooms with a small pair of shears. He doesn't look up as the Sultan passes, but his movements grow even more precise, as if he's silently honoring the moment with extra care. A mainstream historical fact blooms softly in your mind. Ottoman palace gardens were carefully designed extensions of imperial power and private tranquility. They were not random collections of plants, but symbolic landscapes: tulips for refinement, cypress for eternity, roses for spiritual devotion, fountains for divine mercy and abundance. As you walk, you notice how the layout guides your gaze, first toward a stand of orange trees, heavy with fragrant blossoms, then to a long rill of water running between marble channels, then to a small pavilion tucked in the corner like a secret. The Sultan pauses beside a rectangular pool lined with marble. Its surface is almost perfectly still, disturbed only by the gentle drip of water from a small lionhead spout. The reflection of the sky and garden merges here, the real and the mirrored world touching in silence. He stands there for a long moment. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. This is part of the routine, not a show, but a daily conversation with stillness. A nightingale sings from a fig tree nearby, its song curling through the air like a ribbon. A pair of doves peck at stray seeds fallen near the path. One of the attendants quietly sprinkles more for them. You breathe in, and the scent of damp earth, leaves, and faint jasmine folds into your lungs. It feels like the garden is gently rearranging your thoughts, tucking sharp edges under soft moss. You pass a small domed pavilion open on all sides, its interior lined with tiled panels painted in blues and greens. Inside, cushions are arranged under the arches, facing the Bosphorus. The Sultan steps in and takes a seat, looking out over the water. From here, the view widens. You can see the strait glittering in the distance, ships gliding slowly across it like moving brushstrokes. The morning light pours over the rooftops of Istanbul, turning minarets into thin spears of brightness. The garden around the pavilion hums quietly. A gardener rakes patterns into the gravel outside. Another tends a small herb bed, brushing his fingers over mint and basil. Here comes a quirky historical tidbit. Some sultans were so attached to their gardens that they personally directed which trees should be moved, which pools should be deepened, and which flower beds should change colors from season to season. There are records of orders specifying not just which tulips to plant, but in what exact pattern, like living calligraphy written in petals. You get the sense that this sultan understands why. The garden is not just decoration, it's a tool for thought. A young page approaches with a small brass tray. On it sits a simple glass of water and a tiny bowl of sugared almonds. The sultan takes one almond thoughtfully, then sets the bowl down beside him. A sparrow hops cautiously closer, eyeing the treat with the kind of boldness only birds and children possess. The sultan flicks one almond onto the stone edge of the pavilion. The sparrow snatches it, then disappears into the branches above. You catch the faintest smile on the sultan's face. The attendants maintain a respectful distance, standing just beyond the pavilion steps. They do not interrupt. They do not rush him. They understand that this quiet stroll, this moment of sitting, this watching of water and birds and trees, is not leisure. It's maintenance of mind, of patience, of perspective. The sultan's gaze returns to the Bosphorus. You sit quietly nearby, letting your eyes blur slightly so that the world becomes soft shapes and colors. Green cypress, blue tiles, white marbles, silver water, dark indigo robe. Nothing demands your attention. Everything holds it gently. In this garden, time feels elastic, not wasted, not measured, just allowed. Eventually, the sultan rises, refreshed in a way no court audience could ever achieve. The attendants step aside as he returns to the path, the rhythm of his morning carrying him now toward the next quiet duty, news, reports, and the day's early decisions. You follow, leaving the fountains and birds behind. But the feeling of the garden, the sense of slowed breath, softened thought, and grounded presence goes with you, trailing like the scent of jasmine in your wake. You leave the garden's cool serenity with the Sultan, stepping back into the palace corridors just as the day begins to reveal its more practical side. The sounds change subtly, still soft, still careful, but now threaded with purpose. Footsteps move with direction. Pages carry scrolls with a little more urgency. Somewhere deeper inside, the faint scratch of reeds on parchment signals that scribes have begun recording the day's earliest affairs. This is the time when the Sultan receives his morning briefing. Not dramatic, not heavy, just a gentle, measured intake of what the empire wants him to know before the day fully wakes. You follow him into a small, sunlit chamber known as the divan antechamber, where the palace scribe already waits. He bows deeply, holding a bundle of scrolls tied with a thin braid of red silk. No piles of paper, no towering stacks. Just a few carefully curated reports selected for the Sultan's morning mind. The scribe is a calm, scholarly figure, dressed in a modest robe of soft grey. Ink stains darken his fingertips, and tiny flecks of gold dust cling to the sleeves of his garment, remnants of illuminated manuscripts he worked on earlier. His beard is neatly trimmed, his expression serene but alert, like someone whose thoughts move quickly, even when his body moves slowly. "May your morning be clear, my Sultan," he says gently. The Sultan nods, inviting him to begin. The first scroll is unrolled with care, the parchment whispering as it opens. On it lies a beautifully written summary of the latest news from the provinces. Nothing too heavy, nothing too dire. Just the things a ruler should know before breakfast settles entirely. You glance at the script. It flows like water across the page, graceful, practiced, the hallmark of a court-trained calligrapher. The scribe reads softly. Updates from governors, early market prices on grain, repairs needed on a small bridge outside Bursa, a report about new citrus seedlings arriving in Antalya. All mundane, but all valuable. The Sultan listens with an expression of steady calm. No rush, no fret. Just awareness settling gently into place. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Ottoman administrators prided themselves on maintaining a surprisingly thorough information network. Couriers, officials, and observers sent regular updates to the palace, allowing the Sultan to understand not just the empire's politics, but the everyday pulse of life, from agriculture to trade to weather patterns across distant provinces. The scribe moves on to the second scroll, which is shorter. This one contains notes on the palace itself, renovations in a guest wing, the schedule for musicians, small disputes among workers, the arrival of a rare book at the library. The Sultan raises one eyebrow slightly at the last line. A new manuscript? He makes a small gesture with two fingers, an instruction for the scribe to send it to his library later. The scribe nods. Nothing is spoken, but the decision is clear. Next comes the third scroll, the thinnest of all. The scribe unrolls it slowly, his face composed but, you think, slightly amused. "It seems," he says gently, "that a merchant ship ran aground near Galata due to overconfidence rather than weather." The Sultan lifts his gaze, curious. The scribe continues, "Witnesses say the captain insisted he knew the channel better than the fish. But the fish, it seems, disagreed." You feel a quiet laugh echo inside you. Even the Sultan's lips curl ever so slightly upward. A quirky historical tidbit floats into your mind. Ottoman scribes often slipped mild humor into minor reports because they believed a ruler should start the day with clarity and a reminder not to take all things too seriously. Historians still argue whether this was official practice or simply a tradition tolerated by good-natured sultans. The moment passes. The scribe rolls up the scrolls neatly and places them on a small wooden table. But he isn't finished. From inside his robe, he produces a small leather-bound notebook, thin, the color of walnut, tied with a simple cord. This, he explains, contains observations from the morning astronomers. You tilt your head. Astronomers. The palace really is a world unto itself. The scribe opens the notebook, showing delicate sketches of constellations, notes on star positions, and small diagrams of planetary paths. The handwriting is tighter here, more technical. The scholars believe the coming month will have clear skies, he says. Good for observation, good for travel. The Sultan studies the page quietly. You sense a shift, not dramatic, but meaningful. This part matters to him. Perhaps he finds comfort in the orderly dance of the heavens. Or perhaps he simply appreciates the reminder that even beyond the empire's borders, even beyond human concerns, something vast and predictable continues its slow motion. When the briefing ends, the scribe bows again, waiting for dismissal. "May your day be blessed with ease," the Sultan says softly. The scribe smiles, small, genuine, and withdraws from the room as silently as a page turning itself. You stand beside the Sultan as he absorbs the lingering quiet of the chamber. The room feels fuller now, not with noise, but with thoughtful presence, the kind of stillness that follows information absorbed calmly, without alarm. He breathes in deeply, letting the news settle. The empire is not perfect, but it is steady. And this morning, that is enough. The Sultan turns toward the stairway leading up to the astronomy tower, one of his favorite stops before the true business of the day begins. You follow, already sensing the hush of high ceilings, brass instruments, and early star charts awaiting above. You follow the Sultan up a narrow stone staircase, whose steps curve gently along the inside of a tower. The air grows cooler as you ascend. Each footfall echoes softly, as though the walls are whispering your progress upward. By the time you reach the top, the palace feels far below. Its bustle muted, its routine softened into a distant hum. At the top of the stairs, an oak door stands slightly ajar. A sliver of pale morning light stretches across the floor, shimmering like a thin ribbon of silver. The Sultan pushes the door open with a quiet, practiced movement, and you step into the astronomy chamber, one of the palace's most contemplative spaces. The room is almost circular, its walls lined with wooden cabinets that hold scrolls, charts, brass instruments, and delicate measuring tools wrapped in cloth. Narrow windows let in the fresh morning air, carrying with it a faint scent of sea salt from the Bosphorus far below. A domed ceiling stretches overhead, painted deep blue and peppered with tiny gold stars. Many sultans before this one stood here at sunrise, tracing the skies, believing that understanding the heavens was a way of understanding the world. Two court astronomers wait quietly inside. Their robes are modest, cream and pale grey, and their hands are stained with the soft smudges of charcoal and ink. They bow deeply. "Clear skies today, my Sultan," one of them says, voice low and warm. The Sultan steps toward the observatory's main window, where a long wooden table holds tools of early science, astrolabes polished to a golden glow, ivory compasses, angled sighting rods, and delicate star charts painted with precision. The astronomers unfurl a fresh sheet of parchment across the table. Its surface is covered in neat lines marking celestial paths, planets, and the slow drift of constellations. A mainstream historical fact glimmers softly. Ottoman scholars were deeply involved in astronomy, building observatories, improving astrolabes, and charting lunar cycles with impressive accuracy. Their work influenced navigation, prayer times, travel routes, and even agricultural planning. One astronomer holds up an astrolabe, the brass catching the early sunlight. "We observed Jupiter just before dawn," he explains. "Its position this month remains favorable for clear weather and steady currents." The Sultan nods thoughtfully. He lifts the instrument himself, tilting it with practiced ease. You notice how comfortable he is with it, not as a ruler, but as a student of the world. He aligns the instrument with a narrow sliver of sky visible through the open window. The morning air brushes his face, and a small, satisfied silence settles over him as he studies the angle of light. You stand nearby, watching the quiet ritual unfold. It feels almost sacred. No grand speeches, no urgent questions. Just a man, a tool, and the morning sky. One astronomer steps forward with a slim notebook. "We've also charted the moon's recent movements," he says, opening the pages to reveal delicate sketches. "Its cycle this month suggests calmer tides." The other adds, "And last night's measurements match the predictions from the Damascus scholars." This sparks a subtle smile from the Sultan, a rare expression, but unmistakably pleased. And here comes a quirky historical tidbit. Ottoman astronomers sometimes competed playfully with scholars from Persia, Damascus, or Cairo over whose predictions proved most accurate. Historians still argue whether this rivalry improved scientific precision or produced more creative excuses when predictions went wrong. The Sultan traces a line on the chart with one finger, then sets the astrolabe back on the table. He doesn't comment on decisions or dictate commands. He doesn't rush to conclusions. He simply absorbs. You can feel the room breathe around him, slow, spacious, deliberate. The astronomers continue updating him softly. New star sightings from travelers. Unusual cloud patterns over Anatolia. A curious report from a sailor about strange glowing waters at night. The Sultan raises an eyebrow at that last one. "Phosphorescent algae," one astronomer explains gently. "Perhaps." The Sultan gives a slow nod, though the slight tilt of his head suggests he enjoys the mystery more than the explanation. He walks toward a wooden chest and retrieves a rolled manuscript sealed with a bronze clasp. You watch as he unrolls it across a side table. Inside is a stunning star map, deep indigo background with constellations painted in shimmering gold leaf. He studies it in silence, not because he needs to, because he likes to. Historians still argue whether sultans used these morning sessions primarily for statecraft or simply for peace of mind. But looking at him now, calm and quiet under a painted sky, you suspect the latter plays a larger role than anyone admits. The astronomers step back respectfully as the Sultan moves to the window, resting one hand on the carved stone sill. The Bosphorus stretches out before him, wide, glittering, and alive with slow-moving ships. The morning breeze lifts the edge of his robe. He closes his eyes briefly, breathing in the faint salt air. Above him, gulls circle lazily. Below him, the great capital murmurs awake. Around him, the quiet tools of ancient science wait patiently. This is not a moment of power, not a moment of decision, just a moment of presence. The astronomers bow once more, taking their leave. The Sultan lingers a little longer, watching a small vessel drift across the shimmering water far below. Then he turns, ready to descend the stairs and step into the diplomatic part of his morning. Soft conversations, subtle meanings, and the gentle dance of early court visitors. You follow him down, the air warming slightly with every step, the quiet of the tower folding around you like a silk curtain ready to close. You descend from the astronomy tower with the Sultan, the cool stone steps gently curving beneath your feet. As you re-enter the palace corridors, the atmosphere shifts once again, not louder, but more awake. Servants glide with clearer purpose. A few distant voices murmur low greetings. Somewhere far off, metal gently taps metal as breakfast trays are polished and arranged for later court duties. But here, in this quiet stretch of the inner palace, the rhythm remains soothing. Because this next part of the Sultan's morning is diplomacy. Not tense negotiations, not confrontations, not courtroom grandstanding, but soft diplomacy, whispered in warm rooms and delivered in slippered footsteps. You enter a modest reception chamber, brightened with patterned windows that filter sunlight into geometric pools of gold. Thick carpets soften every step. Cushions are arranged in symmetrical clusters along low divans. A ceramic brazier gives off a faint scent of warming amber resin. There are no raised thrones here, no sharp symbols of dominance, just shared space. A eunuch at the doorway bows and announces gently, "An envoy from the northern traders, my Sultan." You watch as a man enters, a guest dressed in burgundy and dark wool, his robe dusted lightly from the early morning travel. He removes his shoes respectfully at the carpet's edge, standing with hands folded. The Sultan gestures for him to sit. No grandeur, no theatrics. This is diplomacy in slippers. A table is brought forward, small, inlaid with mother of pearl, topped with 2 cups of warm sherbet. The shimmering drink is pale amber, cooling slightly in the morning air. The envoy tries to hide his surprise at the informality, though his eyes soften. He clearly expected something rigid, ceremonial, imposing. Instead, he finds calm. The Sultan speaks the first words, his voice low and measured. "Your journey was peaceful, I trust." The envoy relaxes visibly. They begin with pleasantries, weather, roads, the unpredictable stubbornness of mules. A gentle warm-up, as natural as stretching before a long walk. And here slips in a mainstream historical fact. Ottoman diplomacy often emphasized hospitality and calm conversation before any formal negotiation. Sultans and viziers knew that a relaxed guest spoke more freely, revealed more honestly, and listened more open-heartedly. You watch the Sultan carefully. He tilts his head as the envoy talks, attentive without dominating. His hands rest quietly in his lap. He sips his sherbet slowly. The envoy begins to mention trade routes, grain shipments, and the impact of last season's early snow in the northern hills. His tone remains cautious. After all, one does not casually confess logistical troubles to an empire. But the Sultan's demeanor encourages honesty. He doesn't chastise. He doesn't interrupt. He waits. You see the envoy breathe easier. A small notebook is brought forward by a page. The Sultan opens it and quickly scans a few lines, notes prepared earlier by a scribe. He nods slowly. Then he says, in the same soft tone, "Snow troubles many, but preparations trouble more. Tell me what your people need, and what they can offer in return." No pressure, just clarity, just human-level problem-solving. The envoy begins explaining their situation in earnest now, hands gesturing slightly, slipping into his native rhythm. The conversation flows like warm stew, simple, hearty, comforting. A quirky historical tidbit wanders into your thoughts. Some visiting diplomats later wrote in private journals that the Ottoman court softened one's mind like warm butter, making conversations unexpectedly gentle. Historians still debate whether this was deliberate strategy or simply the empire's natural inclination toward quiet civility in the morning hours. As the discussion continues, a small tray is brought in with sesame biscuits, each sprinkled delicately with crushed pistachios. The envoy hesitates before taking one, then smiles shyly as the Sultan nods for him to enjoy. You take in the atmosphere, the muted colors of the cushions, the slow curling of incense from a brass dish, the way sunlight shifts across the patterned tiles, the deliberate pacing of a conversation meant not to rush, but to unfold. It becomes clear that this room, this gentle ritual, is never meant to intimidate. It's meant to invite trust. The envoy eventually bows his head. His shoulders are no longer tense. He looks more like someone visiting an old friend than a ruler. The Sultan closes the notebook softly. "Your request will be considered with care," he says, "and your journey home should carry ease, not worry." With deep gratitude, the envoy rises and bows again. He steps backward respectfully, allowing the attendants to guide him out. When the door closes, the chamber feels even more peaceful than before. The Sultan sits for a moment, savoring the last sip of sherbet. No triumph, no smugness, just calm reflection. He stands. The attendants gather cushions, roll up the small tray, and clear the room in silent unison. And you sense the next movement of the morning approaching. Music drifting closer. Drums warming up, flutes whispering through the halls. The Janissary musicians are beginning their gentle practice. The Sultan turns toward the sound. You follow, wrapped once again in the quiet grace of his morning routine. You follow the Sultan down a softly curving hallway, where the air grows warmer and richer with every step. The faint smell of polished brass mingles with something earthy, like leather, wood, and distant campfire smoke. Then you hear it, a low, steady hum. Barely music at first, more like sound preparing to become music. This is the rehearsal space of the Mehter, the Janissary band, famous in battle, thunderous in ceremony, and surprisingly gentle in the earliest hours of morning. The Sultan enters a broad courtyard enclosed with high walls and tiled arches. The light here is soft, filtered through wooden screens carved with geometric designs. The musicians are already assembled, though assembled feels too harsh a word for the calm atmosphere. They stand and sit in loose formation, adjusting their instruments with sleepy precision. You've never seen the Mehter like this. No booming drums, no shouting cymbals, no shattering crescendos that shake the air. Just warm-ups, just murmurs of rhythm, just musicians breathing life into the day. A young drummer taps his fingertips lightly across a small davul drum, testing the tension of the skin. The sound is so soft it feels like a heartbeat. A zurna player lifts his reed instrument, blowing a few mellow notes, tentative, rising and falling like a yawn, turning into a melody. One of the older players, wearing a deep saffron coat with embroidered silver trim, gently tightens the strings of a bowed kamanse. When he draws the bow across it, the note trembles through the morning air, cool, sweet, and wistful. The Sultan pauses at the edge of the courtyard. He does not interrupt. He watches. He listens. He lets the morning music unfurl at its own pace. A mainstream historical fact settles over the courtyard like a soft blanket. The Janissary band, often associated with battlefield might, also performed peaceful morning rehearsals inside the palace. These early sessions focused on harmony, tuning, and gentle rhythm rather than power. They helped set a calm tone for the Sultan's day and served as meditative practice for the musicians themselves. The band leader, a dignified man in a tall, white and red bashlik headdress, bows to the Sultan. May your morning be harmonious, my Sultan. The Sultan inclines his head. And yours. The leader claps his hands softly, nothing like the thunderous command used in ceremonies. Just a signal, a beginning. The musicians lift their instruments, and the morning song begins. It is not the fierce, marching grandeur of the Mehter most people know. No, this is something gentler, almost like a lullaby for the palace itself. The drums pulse in slow, measured beats. The flutes weave soft notes between the rhythm. The strings hum beneath it all like a quiet river flowing under stone bridges. A breeze moves through the courtyard, lifting a few leaves that tumble and spin as if dancing along with the melody. Attendants carrying trays slow their pace as they pass, timing their footsteps to match the beat. Even the courtyard cats settle into graceful coils, closing their eyes in contentment. You close your eyes for a moment. The sound washes over you. It steadies the breath. The rhythm of the drums seems to sync with your heartbeat. The flutes melt tension from your shoulders. The soft clash of tiny cymbals rings like early sunlight catching on metal. If music could sweep a room, if rhythm could brush dust from the mind, if harmony could be a scent. This is what the Mehter's morning practice feels like. A quirky historical tidbit tiptoes in. Janissary musicians believed that instruments had tempers. Yes, tempers. Some swore that their drums sounded better if spoken to kindly in the morning, while others whispered prayers to their zurnas before playing. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, affection, or simply the side effect of rehearsing before breakfast. As the warm-up continues, the leader gestures for a transition. The musicians shift into a slightly livelier rhythm. Not loud, not even brisk, just a bit brighter. The courtyard feels as though it inhales. The music paints the morning with color, notes drifting upward like ribbons of silk. The Sultan watches it all with serene appreciation. He taps one finger lightly on his knee, barely perceptible, but perfectly in time. After several minutes, the final notes fade into the air, lingering like warmth from a blown-out candle. The musicians bow toward the Sultan. May your day be guided by harmony, the leader says. And yours by skill, the Sultan replies. The band begins to pack away their instruments, still silent, still precise. The moment dissolves softly, like mist burned away by rising sun. You follow the Sultan as he steps out of the courtyard. Ahead waits another sanctuary of calm, this time filled with feathers, fur, and the curious eyes of creatures who call the palace their home. The morning is far from over, and its gentlest surprises are still unfolding. You follow the Sultan down another shaded passageway, the last soft echoes of the Mehter's morning rehearsal still drifting like warm incense behind you. The palace feels fully awake now, yet still unhurried, as though the entire complex has agreed to rise today with gentleness rather than insistence. The corridor opens into a broad courtyard, and instantly the air shifts again, lighter, fresher, tinged with the sweet scent of hay, feathers, and sunshine. A soft chorus of rustling, cooing, chirping, and the occasional distant roar mixes into the breeze. This is the palace menagerie, a collection of beautiful, rare, and thoroughly spoiled creatures who begin their day with the same calm as the Sultan himself. The moment you step inside, a peacock struts across the path, tail half raised, shimmering with turquoise and emerald like a jeweled mosaic in motion. It glances at you with the imperious confidence of something that knows it's always overdressed and refuses to apologize for it. The Sultan chuckles softly. A keeper bows deeply. He always greets you first, my Sultan. You get the sense that this peacock considers the Sultan the second most important resident of the palace. Maybe. A pair of attendants opens a wooden gate and ushers you into the inner garden of the menagerie, where the morning routines are already underway. A young falconer stands with a sleek, elegant falcon perched on his gloved wrist. The bird's chest rises and falls with controlled breath, wings tucked neatly, eyes focused, as though calculating the exact distance to every moving thing. The falconer bows. She is ready for her morning flight, if it pleases you. The Sultan nods. The falconer releases the bird with a graceful sweep of his arm. The falcon ascends into the glowing sky, its wings slicing the air in powerful strokes. It circles above the courtyard, the silhouette sharp against the early sun, then dives low, skimming the tops of the cypress trees with breathtaking precision. You feel a thrill in your chest. Even in calmness, there's room for awe. A mainstream historical fact flutters through your mind. The Ottoman court prized falconry as both an art and a discipline. Falcons were trained with extraordinary care, and their morning flights were as much a meditation as a sport, a graceful reminder of balance between mastery and nature. You move onward through the garden. Here, doves gather in large flocks, cooing softly as keepers scatter seeds. The birds flutter into the air in gentle waves, creating patterns that ripple like silk banners. A group of attendants cleans a small pool where ducks glide lazily, dipping their bills into fresh water. One duck waddles up to the Sultan, quacks twice, then returns to the pool with the swagger of a creature who believes it just delivered essential diplomatic commentary. A palace cat, sleek, well-fed, and very aware of its status, approaches and rubs against the Sultan's robe. The Sultan crouches, offering a calm hand. The cat accepts, closing its eyes in bliss. The keeper whispers, "She prefers him over all others." You're beginning to suspect every animal in this menagerie has a favorite Sultan story attached to it. You move on and enter a shaded enclosure, where a towering crane stands among tall reeds, one leg tucked neatly beneath its body. Its white feathers glow like brushed silver. The bird tilts its head slowly as the Sultan approaches, acknowledging him with a dignity that feels almost ceremonial. A quirky historical tidbit lands gracefully. Ottoman sultans often kept unusual animals, like snow leopards, exotic birds, and even small gazelles gifted from far-off regions. One chronicler claimed a visiting dignitary once arrived with a gift peacock so proud it refused to eat unless it was fed while standing on a velvet cushion. Historians still argue whether the cushion was real or exaggerated for effect. You follow the Sultan to a final enclosure, a quiet corner where a pair of ibex-like goats rest in the shade. They look at the Sultan with mild disinterest, chewing thoughtfully on leaves. One sneezes loudly. The Sultan's shoulders shake with muted laughter. The menagerie keepers approach with soft bows, offering updates. Which animals slept well? Which refuse their food? Which are molting? Which birds seem restless and may need a longer flight? The Sultan listens with the same calm attentiveness he gave diplomats and astronomers. This is still part of his morning ritual. Stillness through observation, through gentle stewardship, through honoring the creatures under his care. A pair of storks lands on the roof nearby. A tortoise munches slowly on a lettuce leaf. A parrot in red and green preens itself dramatically, then squawks a phrase in Turkish you can't quite catch. The Sultan smiles. He remembers more languages than some viziers, he says quietly. You're not entirely sure he's joking. Finally, the Sultan steps back toward the gate. The animals go on with their routines, unbothered, unhurried, wrapped in the same calm that wraps the palace each morning. As you leave the garden, you realize how strangely grounding this part of the morning has been. watching animals simply be, present, instinctive, unthinking, reminds the Sultan where gentleness lives in the world, even inside an empire. And now, refreshed by feathers, fur, and the quiet wisdom of creatures, the Sultan turns toward the artisan court, where another kind of beauty awaits, handmade, deliberate, glowing with morning light. You follow him, the soft echoes of birdsong fading behind you like a blessing. You walk beside the Sultan as he leaves the menagerie, stepping back into a corridor where the air grows warmer and tinged with the faint scent of hot metal, polished wood, and wet pigments. The quiet coos and wing beats fade behind you, replaced by a different kind of hush, one made of concentration, of hands at work, of minds shaping beauty out of raw material. You enter a sunlit courtyard bordered by small workshops, the kingdom within the palace where artisans begin their day. And here, morning has a different texture. The first thing you notice is the light, golden and angled, pouring through latticed shutters, catching dust motes that drift like tiny glowing constellations. It falls across workbenches, glints on metal tools, warms pots of pigments, and brightens scraps of cut leather on the floor. The next thing is the rhythm. Not loud, not clanging, but steady. Soft scraping, gentle tapping, light brushes sweeping across parchment, steady breathing from artisans hunched in focus. The Sultan steps into the first workshop, the calligrapher's room. Inside, three masters sit at low wooden desks, each with a reed pen poised above a piece of parchment. Ink pots, small ceramic bowls glazed in blues and greens, sit beside them. One calligrapher dips his pen, inhales, and then draws a single stroke across the page. It is slow. It is deliberate. It is perfect. A mainstream historical fact settles into the air. Ottoman calligraphy was considered one of the highest art forms in the empire, and some sultans were themselves master calligraphers. Their scripts, elegant, balanced, precise, were prized works of art, preserved like jewels. The Sultan observes in silence, hands clasped lightly behind his back. He nods as the calligrapher finishes the stroke, acknowledging not just the beauty of the work, but the discipline it requires, the breath control, the posture, the years of practice. The calligrapher bows his head slightly, honored. You move on with the Sultan to the next workshop, the jeweler's room. This space shimmered even before you entered it. Polished stones lie sorted into tiny wooden drawers. Emeralds, carnelians, turquoise pieces catching the light in rich, vibrant tones. Thin sheets of gold rest on soft cloths, and delicate tools, files, chisels, tweezers, are arranged in perfect rows like a surgeon's instruments. A jeweler works quietly on a ring meant for an official. He holds a small sapphire in brass tongs, turning it gently to examine its facets. Then he begins fitting it into a gold setting shaped like a blooming tulip. His hands do not tremble, not even a little. The Sultan watches, eyes soft with appreciation. Craftsmanship, like serenity, is a language he understands. A quirky historical tidbit gleams faintly. Some palace jewelers kept small, superstitious rituals, such as tapping the gem 3 times on the workbench for luck, or whispering the name of the gemstone source before setting it. Historians still argue whether this improved craftsmanship or simply calmed the jeweler's nerves. From jewelry, you walk toward the final workshop of the courtyard, the miniaturist's studio. This room glows with color. It smells of gum arabic, ground pigments, and warm parchment. Here, miniature painters begin their day by grinding colors using small stone mortars. One crushes lapis lazuli with a smooth pestle, turning the deep blue stone into a powder that will become brilliant ultramarine paint. Another mixes vermilion with water, testing the pigment on the edge of a scrap parchment. You watch as a third painter applies tiny strokes to an ongoing miniature, a palace garden scene with delicate trees, tiny figures, elegant patterns on tiled walls. The brush he uses is so fine, it looks like a single hair. The Sultan leans closer. For a moment, he forgets entirely about politics, court duties, the running of an empire. He is simply a man admiring another man's art. The painter notices the Sultan's gaze and adds a single dot of gold leaf to the corner of the page. A flourish, a silent offering. The gold catches the morning light and sparkles like a drop of pure sun. The atmosphere is so quiet, so focused, that even your breath feels like it would be too loud if you let it go suddenly. You move with the Sultan back into the courtyard center, the workshops surrounding you like petals of a flower. Every artisan is working, every sound is soft, every detail is intentional, and it strikes you that these people, these humble masters of craft, shape the empire in ways no army ever could. They beautify it. They preserve its stories. They make the intangible tangible. The Sultan stands in the sunlight for a moment, absorbing the glow of human skill around him. This, like the hammam, like the garden, like the astronomers, is part of what steadies him each morning. Art is not decoration. Here it is discipline, identity, prayer, and peace woven into form. He takes one last look at the calligraphy room, where a fresh stroke is being drawn. Then at the jewelers who fit stone to metal with perfect patience. Then at the painters who paint worlds inside worlds with a brush barely larger than a whisper. He exhales, slow, centered. You sense the morning nearing its close now. Only one piece remains in this gentle ritual, the final moment of quiet reflection overlooking the Bosphorus. A moment every sultan needs before stepping into the day. You follow him toward that sacred stillness. You walk beside the sultan as he leaves the menagerie, stepping back into a corridor where the air grows warmer and tinged with the faint scent of hot metal, polished wood, and wet pigments. The quiet coos and wing beats fade behind you, replaced by a different kind of hush, one made of concentration, of hands at work, of minds shaping beauty out of raw material. You enter a sunlit courtyard bordered by small workshops, the kingdom within the palace where artisans begin their day. And here, morning has a different texture. The first thing you notice is the light, golden and angled, pouring through latticed shutters, catching dust motes that drift like tiny glowing constellations. It falls across workbenches, glints on metal tools, warms pots of pigments, and brightens scraps of cut leather on the floor. The next thing is the rhythm. Not loud, not clanging, but steady. Soft scraping, gentle tapping, light brushes sweeping across parchment, steady breathing from artisans hunched in focus. The Sultan steps into the first workshop, the calligrapher's room. Inside, three masters sit at low wooden desks, each with a reed pen poised above a piece of parchment. Ink pots, small ceramic bowls glazed in blues and greens, sit beside them. One calligrapher dips his pen, inhales, and then draws a single stroke across the page. It is slow. It is deliberate. It is perfect. A mainstream historical fact settles into the air. Ottoman calligraphy was considered one of the highest art forms in the empire, and some sultans were themselves master calligraphers. Their scripts, elegant, balanced, precise, were prized works of art, preserved like jewels. The Sultan observes in silence, hands clasped lightly behind his back. He nods as the calligrapher finishes the stroke, acknowledging not just the beauty of the work, but the discipline it requires, the breath control, the posture, the years of practice. The calligrapher bows his head slightly, honored. You move on with the Sultan to the next workshop, the jeweler's room. This space shimmered even before you entered it. Polished stones lie sorted into tiny wooden drawers. Emeralds, carnelians, turquoise pieces catching the light in rich, vibrant tones. Thin sheets of gold rest on soft cloths, and delicate tools, files, chisels, tweezers, are arranged in perfect rows like a surgeon's instruments. A jeweler works quietly on a ring meant for an official. He holds a small sapphire in brass tongs, turning it gently to examine its facets. Then he begins fitting it into a gold setting shaped like a blooming tulip. His hands do not tremble, not even a little. The Sultan watches, eyes soft with appreciation. Craftsmanship, like serenity, is a language he understands. A quirky historical tidbit gleams faintly. Some palace jewelers kept small, superstitious rituals, such as tapping the gem 3 times on the workbench for luck, or whispering the name of the gemstone source before setting it. Historians still argue whether this improved craftsmanship or simply calmed the jeweler's nerves. From jewelry, you walk toward the final workshop of the courtyard, the miniaturist's studio. This room glows with color. It smells of gum arabic, ground pigments, and warm parchment. Here, miniature painters begin their day by grinding colors using small stone mortars. One crushes lapis lazuli with a smooth pestle, turning the deep blue stone into a powder that will become brilliant ultramarine paint. Another mixes vermilion with water, testing the pigment on the edge of a scrap parchment. You watch as a third painter applies tiny strokes to an ongoing miniature. A palace garden scene with delicate trees, tiny figures, elegant patterns on tiled walls. The brush he uses is so fine, it looks like a single hair. The Sultan leans closer. For a moment, he forgets entirely about politics, court duties, the running of an empire. He is simply a man admiring another man's art. The painter notices the Sultan's gaze and adds a single dot of gold leaf to the corner of the page. A flourish, a silent offering. The gold catches the morning light and sparkles like a drop of pure sun. The atmosphere is so quiet, so focused, that even your breath feels like it would be too loud if you let it go suddenly. You move with the Sultan back into the courtyard center, the workshops surrounding you like petals of a flower. Every artisan is working, every sound is soft, every detail is intentional, and it strikes you that these people, these humble masters of craft, shape the empire in ways no army ever could. They beautify it. They preserve its stories. They make the intangible tangible. The Sultan stands in the sunlight for a moment, absorbing the glow of human skill around him. This, like the hammam, like the garden, like the astronomers, is part of what steadies him each morning. Art is not decoration. Here it is discipline, identity, prayer, and peace woven into form. He takes one last look at the calligraphy room, where a fresh stroke is being drawn. Then at the jewelers who fit stone to metal with perfect patience. Then at the painters who paint worlds inside worlds with a brush barely larger than a whisper. He exhales, slow, centered. You sense the morning nearing its close now. Only one piece remains in this gentle ritual, the final moment of quiet reflection overlooking the Bosphorus. A moment every sultan needs before stepping into the day. You follow him toward that sacred stillness.